Hey everyone, I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these screens behind me. Let me tell you what they are. Those are feeds coming into all of our CBS stations and affiliates across the country. If there is news breaking, happening anywhere in the country or around the world, you're going to hear it right here. Let's begin. One final presidential speech on the world stage in just minutes. President Biden will address leaders from around the globe at the UN General Assembly. We'll bring it to you live. His speech comes amid the threat of war mounting in the Middle East as Lebanon sees its deadliest day of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah in decades. Plus, a state of emergency in Florida as officials prepare for what is looking to become a powerful hurricane in just a matter of days. We're tracking the very latest forecast. This is CBS News 24/7. All right, let's start this morning at the United Nations, where President Biden will address the General Assembly momentarily. The speech will likely be the president's last on the world stage. Big talking point will be the wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang is just outside of the UN and joins me now to discuss. Weijia, so yeah, the president, this is most likely the last time he will be able to address certainly world leaders from around the globe. Of course, he'll probably still do meetings with his G7, G8 counterparts. But what are some of the major talking points that we're expecting to hear in the president's address this morning?
Vlad, it's always great to be with you. I think what we will hear from the president today will mimic what we have heard from him in recent speeches with regard to trying to cement his legacy. And today it will be on the foreign policy front. From the very beginning, he has taken great pride in his decades of experience with foreign policy, and so he will tout all of his accomplishments, what he believes his administration has done, and how he has sort of changed the view again about America, because on day one he said it's time to lead again and work with allies. He'll really make the case that that was the right approach for all of these decisions. He will talk about ending the conflicts in Gaza, in Ukraine, in Sudan, and of course, coming right off the news that the Pentagon made yesterday that the U.S. is sending additional troops to the Middle East. So I expect, Vlad, that this will be a pretty wide-ranging speech, again, focused on everything that he has done in the past 3.5 years.
And so, Weijia, one of the things that the president what the president indicated once he decided not to run for re-election and allowed Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place, one of the things that he said he wanted to do was focus on trying to bring peace in the Middle East. And since he's sort of made that announcement, things have only gotten worse in the region. Now you have Israel almost seemingly opening up a second front in its battle with Hezbollah in Lebanon. What kind of steps is the president hoping to either take or to rally other world leaders to the cause of trying to finally end that conflict?
Vlad, that's a great question, because you're right. For so long now, he has talked about de-escalation. He has talked about the need to do whatever it takes to make sure that the conflict does not expand. But to your point, the opposite is happening, and he hasn't actually done much to try to reverse that with regard to Israel policy. And there has been pressure on him, for example, to condition the aid, whether it is, especially with regard to military aid, and there has been no change in U.S. policy. And we do know that even though he has sent additional troops, that again is meant to prevent a wider conflict from happening. And he has not been able to convince Netanyahu to move forward at this point with that ceasefire negotiation. So in terms of what other tools he has in his pocket, it's hard to tell, because we haven't heard a plan B. He has put so much effort into trying to negotiate and broker that deal that we have not heard about the alternative for if that doesn't happen. And certainly at this case, Vlad, it doesn't look like it will anytime soon.
Yeah, all right. Weijia Jiang, always great to talk to you, my friend. Thank you very much. And folks, we know that the president will soon be on the move, arriving to the UN General Assembly to deliver that address. Of course, we'll keep track of the president's movements and bring it to you as soon as it begins. Let's get to some other news now. As we've been indicating, Israeli missile strikes have killed hundreds in Lebanon in some of the worst fighting in decades. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes. Now The U.S. is ramping up its presence in the region. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay has that report.
Good morning. The U.S. military is bracing for a wider conflict, sending a small number of additional troops to the Middle East. The Pentagon would not specify how many, only that they would augment the 40,000 already in the region in light of the increased tension. This after waves of missiles landed across Lebanon, 1,600 strikes in all, according to the Israeli military. The attacks continued overnight, setting fire to buildings and homes. Hundreds have been killed and thousands wounded, according to Lebanon's health ministry. The Israel Defense Forces say they sent thousands of text, audio, and video messages warning Lebanese civilians to evacuate as they targeted what they claim are buildings hiding Hezbollah weapons stockpiles. They showed videos they say capture secondary explosions after the initial airstrikes as those hidden weapons detonate. Cars choked the highway as people fled into the night, heading north towards the capital, Beirut. Now, the Pentagon says Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has been pressing Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for a diplomatic solution to the fighting. The U.S. State Department is warning all Americans to leave Lebanon while commercial flights are still available. Vlad?
All right, Chris, thanks so much. Right now, the House Foreign Relations Committee is holding a long-awaited hearing on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was subpoenaed to testify, but given that he's attending the UN General Assembly, it's unlikely that he'll appear, which means it could turn into a contempt of Congress battle. Joining me now with the very latest is CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. So, Scott, we do have live pictures up where we potentially might see House Speaker Johnson step to that podium, but let's begin our discussion with what is the latest on this hearing. What are you hearing from your sources?
The House Foreign Affairs Committee has prepared a memo to try to argue why they should hold the Secretary of State in contempt of Congress, which is a provocative thing to do, but not the first time the Republican-led Congress has tried to find members of the Biden administration in contempt for not satisfying their schedules or answering all the questions they've asked. It's not on a road to prosecution, as some contempt of Congress cases have been in the past. That's not this type of case in this type of dynamic and in this type of moment. But what the House Foreign Affairs Committee has been doing is investigating the death of 13 U.S. service members at Abbey Gate in Afghanistan during the withdrawal in 2021. They issued a voluminous report earlier this month detailing what they say is a series of failures by the Biden administration which left those service members vulnerable to attack, including leaving an embassy that was too large there for too long and too late, and not heeding the warnings of other international partners about protecting people on the ground during the withdrawal. The Democrats on the House Foreign Affairs Committee have released their own findings, blaming the Trump administration for putting a date certain on the calendar for a U.S. withdrawal and for not doing enough to ensure the Taliban wouldn't take such a hard line and taking over the country. This is a back and forth that will continue, Vlad, but in this day, at this moment, the back and forth includes the House Republicans on the Foreign Affairs Committee alleging the Secretary of State is in contempt of Congress for not showing up at their date of choice.
And Scott, tomorrow a vote is expected to extend the government shutdown deadline to December 20th, which is also the last day of Congress. What kind of a dynamic does that set up? And what's included in this proposal?
This is a 3-month snooze button to keep things there till December 20th, when they'll get at this again at the fragile moment of the end of a Congress and the end of a presidential administration. The risk of a shutdown much higher in December than it was this week. What this bill does is keep funding where it is for most agencies through that deadline, but that second bullet point's important. It adds about $230 million to help the Secret Service with its mission, protecting its protectees, including the presidential candidates. It also requires the Secret Service hand over a bunch of records to Congress as they investigate the failures in Butler, Pennsylvania, and whatever happened last Sunday in West Palm Beach, Florida. The Secret Service has asked for more resources, asked for more funding, and they are getting it through this bill, which will require a 2/3 vote tomorrow, Vlad. A supermajority, because the Republicans are doing an end run to avoid their own party's parliamentary techniques and tricks. They're going to try to get this through with an overwhelming majority of both parties. They're on a glide path to do that, with Democrats helping keep the government open.
And Scott, one of the things that we saw in that last battle was an attempt by House Speaker Johnson to include language regarding immigration, also language specifically regarding voter integrity, election integrity. Is that at all still on the table, this election integrity stuff that they've been talking about? Because I think there was some kind of political maneuver there to include that in the bill so that if the Democrats voted against it, then the House Speaker could say, well, you see, Democrats aren't for election integrity.
They didn't have, and they never had the leverage to get that thing passed. They didn't have the upper hand. They need Democratic votes to keep the government open. And for Democrats, that bill was a non-starter because it's already illegal for undocumented immigrants to vote in federal elections. It doesn't actually happen, and it just fuels baseless conspiracy theories. It was never going to become law. But yeah, I think you crystallized it well. The House Speaker has given his vulnerable incumbents and his Republican challengers seeking to oust Democrats something to message on the campaign trail over the next 43 days, saying Democrats technically voted against a provision to make it illegal for undocumented immigrants to vote in federal elections. That could have some visceral connection with some voters in battleground districts.
All right, Scott McFarland for us on Capitol Hill this morning. Scott, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much. All right, folks, let's show you some pictures now of President Biden arriving at the United Nations right here in New York City. That is not him arriving. That is just a picture of the UN General Assembly. But we are told that there it is. There we go. President of the United States arriving here at the UN ahead of that speech that he will give to the UN General Assembly. We're told it's going to be about 20 minutes long, and he's expected to address some of the major issues that are facing the world today, including what's been happening in the Middle East with Israel's war against Hamas and Hezbollah, also the war that has been ongoing for now almost 2 years between Ukraine and Russia. And so we expect that the president will also most likely talk about some of the accomplishments that he's been able to achieve on the world stage during his time in office, given that this will be the very last time that he addresses the United Nations General Assembly. We can certainly expect that the president will most likely talk about some of the things that he's been able to accomplish with some of those world leaders who will be in attendance there to hear the president of the United States. And so we're going to keep an eye on the president. It's slated to start. It's right now 10:11, almost 10:12 here in New York City. We're told it's probably going to happen in the next half hour. So once that happens, folks, you're going to see it right here live, most likely start to finish on CBS News 24/7. For now, though, let's talk about some weather and toss it over to our meteorologist who's tracking all the latest developments.
Thank you. Yeah, the big story, of course, the tropics. We had Hurricane John making landfall last night in Mexico. That storm has now weakened, but now we have all eyes on the Caribbean with potential tropical cyclone 9 moving in. And we also have a strong front moving through portions of the east, and that will impact the southeast, bringing heavy rain and followed by the heavy tropical rains from what is likely to become major Hurricane Helene by the end of the week. You see the clouds there. Let's pull up our tropical satellite. Again, this is potential tropical cyclone 9. What you see over here is John, weakened but still producing heavy rainfall. Let's take a look at the latest track of potential tropical cyclone number 9 and look at that strengthening.
All right. The President of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden, stepping to the podium here in New York City at the United Nations General Assembly. He's expected to talk about his vision, which has produced results. Let's listen.
Speaking to this assembly as President of the United States. It'll be my last. I've seen a remarkable sweep of history. I was first elected to office in the United States of America as a U.S. Senator in 1972. Now, I know I look like I'm only 40. I know that. Public life, not out of despair, but out of optimism. The United States and the world got through that moment. It wasn't easy or simple without significant setbacks. But we would go on to reduce the threat of nuclear weapons through arms control, and then go on to bring the Cold War itself to an end. Israel and Egypt went to war. but then forged a historic peace. We ended the war in Vietnam. The last year in Hanoi, I met with the Vietnamese leadership. We elevated our partnership to the highest level. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity for reconciliation. That today, the United States and Vietnam are partners and friends. And it's proof that even from the horrors of war, there's a way forward. Things can get better. We should never forget that. I've seen that throughout my career. In the 1980s, I spoke out against apartheid in South Africa. And then I watched the racist regime fall. In the 1990s, I worked to hold Milosevic accountable for war crimes. He was held accountable. At home, I wrote and passed the Violence Against Women Act to end the scourge of violence against women and girls, not only in America, but across the world, as many of you have as well. But we have so much more to do, especially against rape and sexual violence as weapons of war and terror. We were attacked on 9/11 by al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. We brought him justice. Then I came to the presidency at another moment of crisis and uncertainty. I believed America had to look forward. New challenges, new threats, new opportunities were in front of us. We needed to put ourselves in a position to see the threats, to deal with the challenges, and to seize the opportunities as well. We need to end the era of war that began on 9/11. As Vice President to President Obama, he asked me to work to wind down the military operations in Iraq, and we did, painful as it was. When I came to office as president, Afghanistan had replaced Vietnam as America's longest war. I was determined to end it, and I did. It was a hard decision, but the right decision. 4 American presidents had faced that decision, but I was determined not to leave it to the 5th. It was a decision accompanied by tragedy. 13 brave Americans lost their lives, along with hundreds of Afghans in a suicide bomb. I think those lost lives, I think of them every day. I think of all the 2,461 U.S. military deaths over a long 20 years of that war. 20,744 American servicemen wounded in action. I think of their service, their sacrifice, and their heroism. I know other countries lost their own men and women fighting alongside us. We honor their sacrifices as well. To face the future, I was also determined to rebuild my country's alliances and partnerships to a level not previously seen. We did just that, from traditional treaty alliances to new partnerships like the Quad with the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. I know many look at the world today and see difficulties and react with despair, but I do not. I won't. As leaders, we don't have the luxury. I recognize the challenges from Ukraine to Gaza to Sudan and beyond. War, hunger, terrorism, brutality, record displacement of people, a climate crisis, democracy at risk, strains within our societies, the promise of artificial intelligence and its significant risk. The list goes on. But maybe because all I've seen and all we have done together over the decades, I have hope. I know there is a way forward. In 1919, the Irish poet William Butler Yeats described a world, and I quote, "where things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world," end of quote. Some may say those words describe the world not just in 1919, but in 2024. But I see a critical distinction. In our time, the center has held. Leaders and people from every region and across the political spectrum have stood together, turned the page. We turned the page in the worst pandemic in a century. We made sure COVID no longer controls our lives. We defended the UN Charter and ensured the survival of Ukraine as a free nation. My country made the largest investment in climate clean energy ever anywhere in history. There will always be forces that pull our countries apart and the world apart. Aggression, extremism, chaos, and cynicism. A desire to retreat from the world and go it alone. Our task, our test, is to make sure that the forces holding us together are stronger than those that are pulling us apart. That the principles of partnership that we came here each year to uphold can withstand the challenges. That the center holds once again. My fellow leaders, I truly believe we're at another inflection point in world history, where the choices we make today will determine our future for decades to come. Will we stand behind the principles that unite us? Will we stand firm against aggression? Will we end the conflicts that are raging today? Will we take on global challenges like climate change, hunger, and disease? Will we plan now for the opportunities and risk of a revolutionary new technologies? I want to talk today about each of these decisions and the actions, in my view, we must take. To start, each of us in this body has made a commitment to the principles of the UN Charter to stand up against aggression. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we could have stood by and merely protested. But Vice President Harris and I understood that that was an assault on everything this institution was supposed to stand for. And so, my direction, America stepped into the breach, providing massive security and economic and humanitarian assistance. Our NATO allies and partners in 50-plus nations stood up as well. But most importantly, the Ukrainian people stood up. I asked the people of this chamber to stand up for them. The good news is Putin's war has failed and at his core aim. He set out to destroy Ukraine, but Ukraine is still free. He set out to weaken NATO, but NATO is bigger, stronger, and more united than ever before, with 2 new members, Finland and Sweden. But we cannot let up. The world now has another choice to make. Will we sustain our support to help Ukraine win this war and preserve its freedom, or walk away and let aggression be renewed and a nation be destroyed? I know my answer. We cannot grow weary. We cannot look away. And we will not let up on our support for Ukraine, not until Ukraine wins a just and durable peace in the UN Charter. We also need to uphold our principles as we seek to responsibly manage the competition with China so it does not veer into conflict. We stand ready to cooperate on urgent challenges for the good of our people and the people everywhere. We recently resumed cooperation with China to stop the flow of deadly synthetic narcotics. I appreciate the collaboration. It matters for the people of my country and many others around the world. On matters of conviction, the United States is unabashed, pushing back against unfair economic competition, against military coercion of other nations in the South China Sea, and maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits, and protecting our most advanced technologies so they cannot be used against us or any of our partners. At the same time, we're going to continue to strengthen our network of alliances and partnerships across the Indo-Pacific. These partnerships are not against any nation. They're building blocks for a free, open, secure, and peaceful Indo-Pacific. We're also working to bring greater measure of peace and stability to the Middle East. The world must not flinch from the horrors of October 7th. Any country would have the right and responsibility to ensure that such an attack can never happen again. Thousands of armed Hamas terrorists invaded a sovereign state, slaughtering and massacring more than 1,200 people, including 46 Americans, in their homes and at a music festival. Despicable acts of sexual violence, 250 innocents taken hostage. I've met with the families of those hostages. I've grieved with them. They're going through hell. Innocent civilians in Gaza are also going through hell. Thousands and thousands killed, including aid workers. Too many families dislocated, crowding into tents, facing a dire humanitarian situation. They did not ask for this war that Hamas started. I put forward with Qatar and Egypt a ceasefire and hostage deal. It's been endorsed by the UN Security Council. Now is the time for the parties to finalize its terms, bring the hostages home, and secure security for Israel and Gaza free of Hamas' grip, ease the suffering in Gaza, and end this war. On October 7th, since October 7th, we've also been determined to prevent a wider war that engulfs the entire region. Hezbollah, unprovoked, joined the October 7th attack, launching rockets into Israel. Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. A full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely. And that's what we're working tirelessly to achieve. As we look ahead, we must also address the rise of violence against innocent Palestinians on the West Bank and set the conditions for a better future, including a two-state solution where Israel enjoys security and peace and full recognition and normalized relations with all its neighbors, where Palestinians live in security, dignity, and self-determination in a state of their own. Progress toward peace will put us in a stronger position to deal with the ongoing threat posed by Iran. Together, we must deny oxygen to its terrorist proxies, which have called for more October 7th and ensure that Iran will never, ever obtain a nuclear weapon. Gaza is not the only conflict that deserves our outrage. In Sudan, a bloody civil war unleashed one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. 8 million on the brink of famine. Hundreds of thousands already there. Atrocities in Darfur and elsewhere. The United States has led the world in providing humanitarian aid to Sudan. And with our partners, we've led diplomatic talks to try to silence the guns and avert a wider famine. The world needs to stop arming the generals, to speak with one voice and tell them, stop tearing your country apart. Stop blocking aid to the Sudanese people. End this war now. But people need more than the absence of war. They need a chance to live in dignity. They need to be protected from the ravages of climate change, hunger, and disease. Our administration has invested over $150 billion to make progress and other sustainable development goals. It includes $20 billion for food security, over $50 billion for global health. We've mobilized billions more in private sector investment. We've taken the most ambitious climate action in history. We've moved to rejoin the Paris Agreement on day one. And today, my country is finally on track to cut emissions in half by 2030. On track to honor my pledge to quadruple climate financing to developing nations with $11 billion thus far this year. We've rejoined the World Health Organization, donating nearly 700 million doses of COVID vaccine to 117 countries. We must now move quickly to face Mpox outbreak in Africa. We're prepared to commit $500 million to help African countries prevent and respond to Mpox and to donate 1 million doses of Mpox vaccine now. We call on our partners to match our pledge and make this a $1 billion commitment to the people of Africa. Beyond the core necessities of food and health, the United States, the G7, and our partners have embarked on an ambitious initiative to mobilize and deliver significant finance to the developing world. We're working to help countries build out their infrastructure, to clean energy transition, to their digital transformation, to lay new economic foundations for a prosperous future. It's called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. We've already started to see the fruits of this emerge in Southern Africa and Southeast Asia and in the Americas. We have to keep it going. I want to get things done together. In order to do that, we must build a stronger, more effective, and more inclusive United Nations. The UN needs to adapt and bring new voices and new perspectives. That's why we support reforming and expanding the membership of the UN Security Council. My UN ambassador just laid out our detailed vision to reflect today's world, not yesterday's. It's time to move forward. The Security Council, like the UN itself, needs to go back to the job of making peace, of brokering deals to end wars and suffering. And to stop the spread of the most dangerous weapons, of stabilizing troubled regions in East Africa, from East Africa to Haiti, to Kenya-led mission that's working alongside the Haitian people to turn the tide. We also have a responsibility to prepare our citizens for the future. We'll see more technological change, I argue, in the next 2 to 10 years than we have in the last 50 years. Artificial intelligence is going to change our ways of life, our ways of work, and our ways of war. It could usher in scientific progress at a pace never seen before, and much of it could make our lives better. But AI also brings profound risks, from deep fakes to disinformation, to novel pathogens, to bioweapons. We've worked at home and abroad to define the new norms and standards. This year, we achieved the first ever General Assembly resolution on AI to start developing global rules of the road. We also announced a declaration on the responsible use of AI, joined by 60 countries in this chamber. But let's be honest, this is just the tip of the iceberg, what we need to do to manage this new technology. Nothing is certain about how AI will evolve or how it will be deployed. No one knows all the answers. My fellow leaders, it's with humility I offer 2 questions. First, how do we as an international community govern AI? As countries and companies race to uncertain frontiers, we need an equally urgent effort to ensure AI's safety, security, and trustworthiness. As AI grows more powerful, it also must grow more responsive to our collective needs and values. Benefits of all must be shared equitably. It should be harnessed to narrow, not deepen, digital divides. Second, will we ensure that AI supports rather than undermines the core principles that human life has value and all humans deserve dignity? We must make certain that the awesome capabilities of AI will be used to uplift and empower everyday people, not to give dictators more powerful shackles on the human spirit. In the years ahead, there may well be no greater test of our leadership than how we deal with AI. Let me close with this. Even as we navigate so much change, one thing must not change. We must never forget who we're here to represent. We, the people. These are the first words of our Constitution, the very idea of America. They inspired the opening words of the UN Charter. I made the preservation of democracy the central cause of my presidency. This summer, I faced a decision whether to seek a second term as president. It was a difficult decision. Being president has been the honor of my life. There's so much more I want to get done. As much as I love the job, I love my country more. I decided after 50 years of public service, it's time for a new generation of leadership to take my nation forward. My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people. It's your people that matter the most. Never forget, we are here to serve the people, not the other way around. Because the future will be won by those who unleash the full potential of their people, to breathe free, to think freely, to innovate, to educate, to live and love openly without fear. That's the soul of democracy. It does not belong to any one country. I've seen it all around the world, and the brave men and women who ended apartheid, brought down the Berlin Wall, fight today for freedom and justice and dignity. We saw it, that universal yearning for rights and freedom in Venezuela, where millions cast their vote for change that hadn't been recognized. But it can't be denied. The world knows the truth. We saw it in Uganda, LGBT activists demanding safety and recognition of their common humanity. We see it in citizens across the world peacefully choosing their future. From Ghana to India to South Korea, nations representing 1/4 of humanity who will hold elections this year alone. It's remarkable, the power of we the people, that makes me more optimistic about the future than I've ever been. Since I was first elected to the United States Senate in 1972, every age faces its challenges. I saw it as a young man. I see it today. But we are stronger than we think. We're stronger together than alone. And what the people call impossible is just an illusion. Nelson Mandela taught us, and I quote, "It always seems impossible until it's done. It always seems impossible until it's done." My fellow leaders, there's nothing that's beyond our capacity if we work together. Let's work together. God bless you all, and may God protect all those who seek peace. Thank you.
All right, you've been watching President Joe Biden delivering remarks at the United Nations. He called this an inflection point in history. The president discussed his administration's achievements in fighting global change, but the president spent the majority of the speech discussing the war in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, and the challenges with China. It was a bit of a victory lap for the president in announcing or speaking of some of his accomplishments, but I want to get into all that the president covered during that speech. We have team coverage. Let's begin with senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang, who's back with us. We also have Charlie D'Agata also joining us for this discussion. And the screen was too fast. Who is that? Oh, our friend Zeke Miller is also joining us to talk about this. Good to see all three of you. Weijia, let me begin with you. We talked about this a little earlier in the show about what we would hear from the president, and it was sort of a bit of planting his legacy for all the world to see, to hear about some of the achievements that he accomplished during his 4 years in office. Break it down for me.
Vlad, you're absolutely right. This was not a political speech in nature, but certainly the president had an opportunity to make his case for why he believed his approach was the right one. And from his very first foreign policy speech, we knew that his primary goal was to reestablish the U.S. as a leader when it came to all of these things that he spoke about, including ending conflicts in various places. And of course, during his presidency, he has seen those wars break out in Ukraine, in Gaza, Sudan. So he has talked talked at length about the need to end those. And I also thought it was really notable, Vlad, that he had a direct message to autocrats. And he said, quote, "Some things are more important than staying in power," of course, alluding to his own personal legacy and what he sacrificed by stepping down and off the ticket to make way for the vice president to be the Democratic presidential nominee. So even though, again, this was not meant to be a speech that was political in nature, certainly he is well aware of the critics and the audience. But in this case, the audience was the world. And to your point, Vlad, he really wanted to cement his legacy on the foreign policy front, which is exactly why he did speak at length about those conflicts, about climate change, about the investments. Take a listen to what he said about the attack that unfolded on October 7th, which is almost 1 year since then.
The world must not flinch from the horrors of October 7th. Any country would have the right and responsibility to ensure that such an attack can never happen again. Thousands of armed Hamas terrorists invaded a sovereign state, slaughtering and massacring more than 1,200 people, including 46 Americans, in their homes and at a music festival. Despicable acts of sexual violence, 250 innocents taken hostage. I've met with the families of those hostages. I've grieved with them. They're going through hell.
And also said that we are working to reach a diplomatic solution regarding the tension on the Israeli-Lebanese border. He still believes a diplomatic solution is possible in general to end the war there. But Vlad, one thing we have not heard is how. Of course, we know that he has been working around the clock to try to, make that ceasefire and hostage deal happen. And so far, it has not. And so that may be the one thing that is, overshadowing all of his accomplishments, because it is unfolding minute by minute in the Middle East.
Exactly. We should just point out to our viewers that you are looking at some live pictures there of Mahmoud Abbas, who is the president of the Palestinian Authority there at the United Nations. And so we just stand by. Zeke, stand by. Charlie, let me bring you in. Let's talk first about the state of the Middle East, and we'll talk about what the president had to say with regards to Ukraine. One of the things that the president did say was he did reference the civilians in Gaza, Charlie, saying, quote, that they did not ask for this. But the president had also reiterated his call for a two-state solution, something that looks increasingly out of reach, certainly not going to happen within his presidency. And as he was speaking, I'm told that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was referencing the ongoing missile strikes that his country is carrying out in Lebanon against Hezbollah, saying anybody who has a missile in their living room is not safe, Charlie.
Yeah, Vlad, it is a very dynamic situation in Lebanon, to say the least. I mean, all morning we've been getting notes from our colleagues in the field talking about these airstrikes. Almost 600 people were killed in Lebanon, as President Biden mentioned, the people in Gaza, the civilians who did not invite that conflict. The idea of a two-state solution is falling on deaf ears, certainly when it comes to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. However, even in this building that is based on war, they are all talking about a diplomatic solution, particularly when it comes to Lebanon, because it can't continue to escalate the way it is. And yesterday, Pentagon officials said that more U.S. troops would be headed out to that region in support of the ones that were already there. There are 40,000 U.S. troops and bases throughout the region. There's an aircraft carrier, submarine. They wouldn't specify how many troops or what they would be tasked to do, citing operational security. But it's worth adding that the Harry Truman aircraft carrier has left toward the Mediterranean, which gives the opportunity to put 2 aircraft carrier groups in that region. So the United States continues to be forward postured because of the events that are unfolding there. It's going to take a couple of weeks for that carrier to be there, and it gives the option of having that kind of military force there. So yes, on one side, everybody here is talking about diplomacy, but they do believe that the presence of U.S. forces in that region has served as a deterrent, certainly when it comes to Iranian involvement because of the conflict that's happening with Hezbollah.
Charlie, let me just also ask you about another major conflict happening in the world that the president did address, which is, of course, the conflict in Ukraine. Now, you've covered both the war in the Middle East and the one in Eastern Europe. And here, the president seemed to indicate that he wants the Ukrainians to stay the course to achieve what he called a just and durable peace. But it's not really clear. He didn't really lay out a vision of how that war is expected to end, although we know, as you do, that President Zelensky plans to present something that he's calling a victory plan, which would ensure more military aid and support from the West. What do you make of the president's remarks and this plan that Zelensky has?
Well, first of all, President Zelensky and his government will be pleased to hear that level of commitment, kind of stronger words than we have been expecting. And it's also worth noting that President Zelensky, it's only recently, and by recently I mean the past sort of 3 or 4 months, that he has even talked about some sort of peaceful solution or diplomatic solution to the conflict that is going on. However, as you pointed out, it's hard to see how that solution is going to come through, at least in the weeks and months ahead. We'd be interested to see President Zelensky's plan. We know the incursion of the Ukrainian military into Russia. Here, they're sort of looking at it as, well, maybe that was a chance in order to divert Russian troops from the battlefields of Ukraine. If that was the case, that didn't happen. President Putin did not shift those troops. Maybe that will be a land trade in future discussions.
Yeah, Charlie, thank you very much. And let's bring in Zeke Miller, White House correspondent for the Associated Press, our old friend. Zeke, so one thing that Ouija brought up that I just want you to sort of address is that line that the president did have. It was a pretty apolitical speech until sort of the very end, where he got a little whimsical when he talked about, or I should say nostalgic. He says that he loves his job. There's so much more I want to get done. But as much as I love the job, I love my country more. Some things are more important than staying in power. And that line, Charlie, out of all the other things that President Biden spoke about, got a very sustained round of applause.
I mean, what's notable there is that he's speaking not just to a room full of democracies, he's speaking to the world and where there are many leaders who don't give up power across multiple continents. And for that to get, it's hard you'd have to go back to that shot and look back, who was applauding at that line. But it's probably those democracies who are doing most of the applause there. But it was an entire speech of that, from start to finish, the president talking about his first appearance at the UN, more than 50 years ago in a very different context, to when he's speaking now and talking about how the world has changed, but how he is somehow still optimistic, even despite all these global challenges that we've been talking about for the last few minutes. This is sort of the President Biden's attempt to sort of deliver a coda to his 50 plus years in public life, and a lot of that spent working on foreign affairs.
Yeah. Zeke Miller, always great to talk to you, my friend. Charlie D'Agata, Ouija Zhang, you are all amazing. Thanks for sticking around to speak with us. We always appreciate you. Thanks so much. All right, folks, a lot more news ahead. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the other top stories we're tracking this morning. The gunman who killed 10 people at a Boulder, Colorado supermarket in 2021 was found guilty on dozens of counts and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Ahmed Halisa pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia after the mass shooting. His lawyers argued he could not tell right from wrong. A Missouri death row inmate is scheduled to be executed tonight, despite prosecutors saying he may be innocent. The state's Supreme Court and the state's governor both rejected pleas to stop the procedure. That leaves it up to the Supreme Court to decide, with only hours before the scheduled lethal injection. Marcellus Williams was convicted of a fatal stabbing in 1998. In 2021, top prosecutors attempted to vacate his conviction and sentence, but that was denied. Williams has long maintained his innocence. And still no deal. Boeing made what it called its best and final offer to the tens of thousands of striking machinists. It includes bigger raises and larger bonuses, but the workers' union isn't satisfied with the proposal and will not be moving to ratify the deal before Boeing's deadline at the end of the week. The workers voted to strike on September 13th, and Boeing could face billions in losses. All right, President Joe Biden took a moment to address the perils of climate change moments ago at the UN General Assembly in New York City. as 2024 breaks records for high heat. CBS News is investigating how climate change may impact votes in November. Joining us is CBS News Philadelphia reporter Joe Holden, who met voters where climate change has impacted their lives. And he joins me now to talk about that. So, Joe, what did you find when you asked folks about climate change and how it's altered the landscape, not just in people's lives, but in your reporting specifically?
Vlad, yes, so we've been looking at the Jersey Shore, particular areas, Cape May County, Atlantic County. We could stand here and talk about problems that have been long running at the shore, the Back Bay nuisance floods. But you know what? There was a coastal low parked out in sea just off the Atlantic coast that brought some significant flooding just over the last 48 hours to parts of Cape May and the Wildwood, Stone Harbor, Avalon, to the degree that you didn't want to drive your car to maybe your favorite restaurant. You were going to take a canoe. That is something that is certainly alarming for a lot of folks along the shore. What they're also experiencing now, more the here and now, is on a sunny day, given a light breeze, all of a sudden, those same streets with no rain, no storms, no tropical systems or depressions are now also experiencing flooding. Officials will tell you that is due to rising sea levels. We've talked to mayors and engineers. Here's some of what they had to share with us about what they're experiencing. To explain what they've told us is it could be a bright, sunny day, and they feel like they are in the twilight zone. What they are trying to do is mitigate. So they have plans to improve these bulkhead systems, to raise them to a degree that should cut off those back bays from inundating parts of specifically Wildwood Crest, New Jersey. But the larger picture is that's for the here and now. That's what we're talking about. But what about the NASA projection 26 years from now when that sea level is expected to go a foot higher? There is an interesting story developing in what is New Jersey's 2nd congressional district. Vlad.
Joe, let me also ask you, how have members of Congress addressed climate change in this district?
So the representative there in the 2nd district, which is mostly all of southern New Jersey, especially the shore areas, his name is Jefferson Van Drew. An interesting person. In 2018, he was a Democrat. He voted pro-environmental legislation. His scorecard was an A+. He was in the 90s. And then a party switch for Representative Van Drew. He becomes a Republican, and then charting the course of his votes, he goes from those 90s to last year when that scorecard tracker was at 3%. 3% of his votes are with the climate, with the environment. The rest of it, he has voted against. He voted against some acts that would have at least mitigated some of the effects of climate change across the United States. We asked him about that scorecard. His interaction was somewhat, I know the scorecard, I know what it says, but you know what? I'm more about focusing on what the needs are for the people along the Jersey Shore. He skirted the question in a way that suggests he is a representative when it comes to raising bulkheads and answering the local constituents along the Jersey Shore. But in Washington, Representative Van Drew is voting with a different purpose. He is not siding, as many officials will tell you, with their needs in a distant future.
All right, Joe, excellent reporting. Thank you very much. To see more of Joe's reporting and other CBS reporting about climate change and the 2024 election, go to cbsnews.com/climate change. Thanks, brother. All right, an encore of CBS Mornings coming up next. This is CBS News 24/7.